Hello, everybody, and welcome. Welcome to the masterclass on From Friction to Flow, how to unleash your own and your team's potential. I'm just wondering right now whether tech works. Can you hear me all right? Just give me a thumbs up in the chat if things are fine. Yep, thank you. Hello, Michael. Good to see you again. Morton. Welcome, guys. I hope you're okay with me recording. I promised some of the wannabe participants that I'll be making a recording of this. So I hope that's fine with you. And let's just get started. I will share this time my presentation with you. And I'll always, or sometimes at least occasionally, check my notes to see that I'm not out of excitement, missing out on anything here. So we have a possibility to do this in a more interactive way. When you're active, you're also paying more attention, and with that, you're learning and remembering better than you would otherwise. Totally up to you. And I do have some time set aside by the end of this webinar to answer any questions you might have. So you also may want to just, note them down on a notepad and bringing up later. And I hope you're familiar with Zoom and the chat function, because I will be asking you on a couple of occasions to post something for me and for the other participants in the chat, just to keep, a bit of dialogue at least flowing on this. So briefly about me, I know some of you know me well already, some of you don't. So just really quickly, I have a classic business career in a classic corporate environment, international, and there were very, very exciting years. I like to call this the first chapter of my life, or at least of my career, where I was sort of following, what you're supposed to be doing, what I thought I was supposed to be doing in the corporate world, climbing up the ladder, saying yes to more and more responsibility. Always in the performance space, of course. I don't think there was ever a time that we were not asked to perform, and increasingly so. So performance management and performance leadership has sort of become my home ground from the early years. And in this part of my life, I experienced what I today call friction. A number of situations where I felt frustrated, I felt stuck about things that were not possible, or things that were done in a very different way than what I felt most comfortable with. Just a number of different issues and many situations. Sometimes it's just a little bit of friction, and sometimes it's massive, right? It becomes really destructive. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But so eventually the friction, both externally between me and the organization, and also within myself, became, big enough, great enough, palpable enough for me to have to consider applying myself, using myself and my skills, my capacity in a different manner. So I was looking for a better solution for myself to really feel that I was, performing at my very best. So feeling more free than restricted. And for me, that solution, that choice, was going solo. So I've been a solopreneur for quite some time now. Again, always in the performance space, primarily with executive and team performance coaching. I also work as a network director with F5, and I'm associate partner of Acuity World for many years as well. So all of that, the experience I made from navigating in the, what I call classic corporate, and then switching out to do something else. And today working with clients who, many of them, experience the same kind of thing as me, frustration, feeling stuck. My experience and their experiences I decided to share in the book I published 2 years ago now, a line. You may have that one already. Otherwise, write to me or go to Amazon and get it there. So um, for my clients, not everybody goes solo or into a solopreneurship, right? There are many other ways to deal with things. So either you take on the challenge of friction and you become highly effective in dealing with that. That's a strategy. Or you decide to change things, to make your influence on things and see how far you can actually push the boundaries in the direction that you feel is better. So there's a spectrum of things. This is just my way into it. So for you, you're in the right place if you're a leader. If you're leading a team or if you're leading leaders, it's really a human space thing. So both would apply. If you're already on your career path, meaning that you have some experience, at least that's what my clients usually have, some good leadership experience. They know things. They are quite adept at navigating already and at performing, and they still have years ahead of them. You may have years ahead of yourself where you're not done developing yet, right? You still see potential. You still have aspirations and ambitions, both for yourself, but also for how you impact people around you, and possibly even the world around you. And like my own experience, you're feeling frustrated sometimes, maybe even stuck, because you spend your precious time and energy on misalignment and friction that is really meaningless, right? When you've been busy a full day or a full week and you sit down to breathe and you think, why did that take so long? Why did we have to spend our time and energy this way? So those sort of feelings. Meaningless friction. I have a classic, a top 10 list of things that I've been picking up with my clients over the years. And some of the big ones are, for instance, ego-driven agendas or turf wars. It could be toxic feelings or toxic emotions like distrust, lack of engagement, maybe even sometimes fear. I've experienced that as well in corporate environments. So those toxic emotions also, they hinder action, they hinder creativity. They will come back to that because it's really a downgrade with these toxic emotions. It's also lack of clarity, and with that very often ineffective action. Things you have to go back and redo, things you have to firefight because in the beginning the clarity was simply not sufficient. Unclear communication, ineffective onboarding. And I don't necessarily mean new employees, but every time your team changes, you're likely in a dynamic environment. And sometimes, I know not all of you, but sometimes you get a new team member, even from inside the organization, but still onboarding into the team can be too slow, looking at the tasks at hand and the speed at which you're operating. So the onboarding time we've found has actually been shortened dramatically over the years. So ineffective onboarding is a real messy point of friction. Spending time explaining past performance, battling about past performance, when you could say logically it's actually too late to do something specifically about that number that was already produced. You can learn from it. But we tend to spend really way too much time discussing the past and criticizing past behavior. And that in itself usually is draining. I don't know if you know of draining performance reviews, but that's at least in the client cases that I'm most familiar with and the clients I work with, one of the really big things. And then systems and processes that seem like a total waste of time. Systems and processes that are not supporting you, but taking away, draining your energy. Those are just, let's say, my top 10 from my experience. And I'd really love now for you to just drop in the chat, what's one of your friction points? What is it that you find yourself struggling with at times and that you wish was different, that you wish was not so? What's the worst energy drainer or friction point that you experience having? Drop it in the chat. Again, the more you're active, the better for you, and the more fun it is for me. All right, all right. Oops. So are we still on the sharing screen? We're back to my screen. You see it all right? If you don't, let me know. And now, of course, I would love this too. Hey, Gita, good to see you. You made it. So for some reason, I can't activate my screen. Let me just see here. Right back. Share screen. Here we go. And share. Okay, so you know all of this, and you also know somehow that there's a better way to operate it. You have some ideas of your own. I know some of you are really independent thinkers. So you know there's a better way, and you want to get there. You're impatient to get there, but maybe your environment doesn't support your ideas, or maybe you just haven't, or maybe you haven't found a practical way of going about it. So this masterclass is for you. If you're looking to strengthen your capacities, I mean, you and those in your team, like resilience, for instance, flexibility, engagement, motivation, and there'll be more of them. The soft stuff, the human capacities, that your team could do so much more if only, right? And if you wonder how you can implement these sort of fluffy concept, the soft data that I've chosen to call human concepts or human data, if you're wondering how can I practically implement that in the day-to-day. And it's also for you if you want to bring out the very best in yourself and your team, meaning you have a growth mindset, you're growth and development oriented. If that's good for you, then I believe you're in the right place. So what I hope that you'll take away today from this masterclass is these 4 key takeaways. I'll be dealing with them directly and indirectly. So the first one is that team performance, it's not your job, not only your job. I know you still have stuff to do, but it's really everybody's job. And I've called it the rising tide lifts all the boats. Point number 2 is that daily practice and small incremental action is actually much better than, scaling up and imagining big action points. So transformation, even big time transformation, happens best, as my experience, in what I'd call micro behavior, micro actions, which is actually a great opening for things to work in the day-to-day. So here I've added my 3-step formula for working with soft stuff, which is a way for you to build a performance culture. So how do I make this stick? Right? So it's not just a poster on the wall or in our internet, but it actually becomes real life, real norms, meaning a culture where things stick. Point 3, the most powerful alignment happens through, and this is one of my total favorites, possibility orientation. I'll attempt to give you what I believe are simple tools, simple, maybe not so easy, but to practice possibility orientation all the time, not just when you're doing strategy reviews and so on, but or strategy sessions, but all the time. I'll come back to what that means because it's a really deep concept. And the last takeaway that I think we can cover today is that human skills are really key. If you want to eliminate friction and align for performance, human skills are key. And part of the reason for that is that the big part, around 75 or 80%, it is said, of the friction that really gets in our way in the day-to-day stems from human behavior, other people's behavior usually, or to be fair, our own. So if that, of course, unlocking this, removing the barriers, you would need human skills to be put in place. So I hope this is what you'll be taking away. I hope that this also matches your expectations for coming in and spending your precious time in this masterclass with me. I'm doing this, I'm sharing what I'm sharing today because it seems to me that the ideas I published in Align about the power of alignment and how it's done, and also the idea of friction and how to deal with that they really resonate and create results, short-term and long-term for the clients that I work with. As I said, you may have questions along the way. If there's a burning question, I think you can raise your hand. At least you could drop it in the chat. Or we'll be taking a bit of time at the end for Q&A. And of course, you're always welcome to contact me if there's something specific that was not clear, that's bothering you, or you want to know more about. So I've picked these 4 key takeaways, and it may sound like a lot, it probably is a lot, but these ideas are also interlinked. And what I found is, and that's really the beauty of working in the human space, once you stack ideas that are interlinked, you will also get exponential effect, right? So little steps added on top of other little steps and little things or seemingly little things can really give you big results in a short period of time, big changes in a short period of time. And that's what I love about this, let's say, incremental or fractal approach to things. So let me just check that I have missed out on something. No, let's dive in. I think the first question really is, so how come we're not already fully aligned? I would claim, but in a different webinar, that alignment is actually a very natural thing. I also write about it in my book. So alignment is actually very natural in well-functioning systems. Now, what we human beings have built are not necessarily well-functioning systems. And if I have to make a long story short, which I do today, then the key issue really that you want to be dealing with, that you really want to be handling and to be navigating well, is the key issue of what's your first P, right? What you see here is just a visual expression of 3 different worldviews that are, at least the 2 of them, predominant in the business world that I operate in today. The third one is coming in more and more. There's a long story behind that I will not be spending our time on today. But in the first worldview, and this is really where the commercial entity and what we today call corporate, all the business schools and the learnings that we get from there, that's where these ideas are born. And this is fundamentally how most of the commercial organizations in the world today are structured. I'm simplifying things a little bit, but the large part of organizations will be what we call machine organizations. And let's just zoom in on the P. I've put it in bold, so it's easier to grasp between all these words. If you run through the words, you may recognize that these are applicable also to the organization where you work. At least I know at least a couple of you are definitely in a machine kind of organization. Profit is really the key driver, which makes a lot of sense in a commercial organization, the way it was structured in the beginning and the whole history before it. When I write T minus 500, this is something that occurred with industrialization, so about 500 years ago. And every worldview, as I presented here, every worldview is attempting to deal with flaws and inefficiencies of the previous worldview. So we find solutions, we destroy old dysfunctional things in order to get to a new and better way of functioning. And so for the machine, there's a lot of good things to be said about the machine. It was super efficient, and this is really not about good or bad, but in the context of performance, this matters a lot. So the key measurement is profit, right? And you imagine, so we can say a lot of fine and fluffy things, like the environment is really important and people in our organization is our most important asset. Have you ever heard that? Yes, big PowerPoint slides. And probably we also mean it, at least to a certain extent, but when things hit the fan, when it really comes down to it, and you have to make that tough prioritization, profit always wins out. Unfortunately, we see that a lot of these days with the insecurities in the global markets, global organizations, and all the disruptions, disturbances, and that profit seems to be taking the front seat if it didn't have it already. So there's this worldview, the machine, or organizational worldview, I should say, also because these systems, these worldviews go for nation states, they go for organizations, they go for departments, teams, and they also go for the individual. So the really expression of value sets that, of course, you hold as an individual, and the values that you share in your team, predominantly in your organization, blah, blah, and so forth. So coming from the machine, we have the community that is sort of the invention in mindset after the machine. It's intended to balance things better, for instance, work-life balance, than what we see in the machine organizations. Here, the piece that actually become very important is people. So this is where we also all of a sudden get all of this attention to engagement surveys, employee satisfaction surveys, and also planet CSR reporting that has become a big thing now. So this green or community worldview is also more and more implemented in organizations today. Depending on how you look at the world and how you make the cut, you would have maybe, let's say, 60% of organizations, commercial organizations, sitting in the machine paradigm, and maybe you would have 20-25%, give or take, in the community paradigm. Now, there are also paradigms that go before the machine, but they're not so prevalent in the space that I work in, so I've skipped that. What does it mean when people and planet actually become more important than profit? People's needs before profit. The green is sort of, or the community is an interesting space because many things are well meant. They're just not always implemented fully, and they are not integrated necessarily in the business model. Meaning that we get these discussions about, okay, so can we actually afford this? Even if we would rather put people first, you know, we still have to finance it, of course, the initiatives. But in a lot of the dialogue and the way we approach things, people and planet will have a much bigger focus and priority than it has in the machine. And this is interesting for us because this is a space that we really need to learn from, to the extent that you haven't picked up everything from here already, of course. This is also where teamwork becomes really big, and that's one of the reasons why I'm actually this interested in community and community values and so on. We'll be looking a little bit about talk about that a little bit later. So here's really the big part. An interesting organization like Microsoft, I know, went from machine thinking in their way to do performance management. Maybe almost 10 years ago now, 8 to 10 years ago, they started with Satya Nadella this journey to become more community oriented in the way that they work with performance management. And it's a big shift because you shift values, you shift your leadership style. It's not necessarily a painless transition, but some of the very big corporations that we do know are working on or are completing their transition into community values. So there's a movement towards that, which is in a way logical, because this is an expression of human evolution. Again, if you want to know more, read about it in my book, or ask me for other sources if you want. There's a lot of resource out there. Last but not least, and I include this because more and more of my clients are operating in the space that is fairly new. It has just been emerging for the past 10 years. Teal, you may have heard about that. Maybe you're operating in teal, or at least have teal practices, or the integrative. This is where purpose, or the organization's evolutionary purpose, and actually also the individual people's purpose, become a big thing. It even replaces, in some cases, strategy work, the way that we know it. It replaces review conversation. It replaces, not replaces, but it becomes the center of reviews. It becomes the center of development talks. So it's hugely exciting. What's really interesting about this new way of thinking and including the P is that it liberates us a lot. It's really found interesting, flexible, very highly functional solutions to a lot of the stuff that you may find yourself dealing with today, either in the machine or even in the community. And for that reason, I'm very interested in what's going on in teal, because it seems to me here that we can really find a way forward. That's one thing. Two is also, if you have younger employees or really young employees, Gen Zers, they're likely to carry this worldview into your organization already and ask you, so what's the purpose? Where do we want to go with this? How do we contribute to the world? Right. And I want to be respected as well for my personal purpose. I want to have space for that. So if you want to be sharp in that kind of dialogue and attract and keep your good young employees understanding teal and having practices that reflect this different worldview, really, this different value set, is highly interesting. It's not so easily accessible, but of course there are ways to do that. So I think with this, I've pointed out the key issue. A lot of friction occurs because we don't agree on what's important. We don't hold the same values. You may not hold the same values as your boss, your manager. You may not hold the same values as one of your key employees in the team. You may not hold the same values as your organization as such, and so on. So a lot of the friction we experience in the day-to-day, and the toughest kind of friction to deal with, is related to our value sets. And toughest because values are important to us. Values determine what we think is right or wrong, or good to do or not good to do. And it's very close to our identity. Of course, there are ways to work with values, and I'll show you that in my 3-step formula for working with soft stuff. So maybe you recognize both your organization and maybe even yourself and some of these expressed values or ways of operating. But time is of the essence, so let's be moving on. What I will promise you is that if you dive into this, as you start to activate and especially integrate the insights that come from this understanding of how the human being operates and why it's important to put the human being at the center of the performance equation, and why it's important to upskill so that you can actually deal with that. Once you start doing that and you also manage to integrate it into your daily work, your practices, and in the way you think, because the way you think will determine your behavior. The way you say things, it will determine your listening capacity, right? The extent to which you use your empathy and so on. So as you start integrating all of this, you will find that you're more and more able to deal with all these frustrating or funny situations that come up in the complex space of human performance. This is not a machine business. This is not, the bottling lines at our great breweries. This is a human space. It's much more messy and complex. And ultimately, you will also, with this approach to performance leadership, see with great clarity how you can actually lead with your team. Remember the one point that team performance, team development is not just your job, it's everybody's job. So to lead with your team to create what I call sustainable or even regenerative performance. And I call it that because the centerpiece of the way that I work and the way I work with my clients is about allowing more energy into the system that we're actually taking out. So I wonder whether that's clear. That's a promise, and if you can try and hold me to it. So Yes, let's move on to the first of these key takeaways that I hope that you're taking. So the rising tide, I call this. So why is it that entering this human performance space actually unlocks potential? When I talk to tough friends of mine, and certainly friends who are deeply anchored in the machine kind of thinking, they will think that potential and unlocking potential and human performance are quite fluffy concepts and not so useful, and certainly time consuming, and with that possibly a waste of time. Now, you want to go the other way. You want to actually dive into this. You want to really immerse yourself into it and make sure that you are up leveled on all the skills and capacities and also views and values that you need to actually change this paradigm. When we do that, when you do that, you're fundamentally changing values. And I thought it'd be interesting here to outline for you what I consider to be non-negotiable value categories and some examples of non-negotiable values in the human performance space. Maybe that will give you a sense of whether this is really for you, for your team. Or maybe you're already there. Maybe you'll spot one or two values where you say, it would be interesting to add that to the equation when I get back home, back to work after this time that we have together. So let's look at this. The first category is relations. In the machine, this is definitely not important. Relations in terms of who can help me move on the ladder, who do I need to know? But the relation stuff is simply too soft. So here we talk about, as you see, trust, acceptance, connection, involvement. I won't sit and read here all the words that you can read for yourself. But the relationship part is really non-negotiable. In a certain sense, if you don't have well-functioning relations, there's a wall you'll hit. There's just a path into the future that you cannot be taking. So if you want to be relevant as a leader, if you want your team to also be, highly functional and high performing in the future, then relations is a non-negotiable value category. Of course, performance is as well. And I found in the community, for instance, that this is something that is a bit difficult to really embrace. Empowerment, not just pseudo empowerment, but actually to let your team members take power, make decisions themselves, distributed decision-making and all of this. Accountability, how do we talk about this? Not just you and your employee or you and your leader, about performance. How are things going? What's going well? What's not yet going as well as we wanted? What's really not okay? To have that accountability talk, I find, is one of the most difficult things for teams to do well. And that's because we're also not very good at conflict management or even entering into conflict or stay with the tension, which of course is a skill and a capacity in itself. And in my opinion, one of the most important skills that we need to put on the agenda if it's not already with you. It's amazing what that capacity will do for you, the ability to stand in tension. When you can do that, you can also much more easily hold each other accountable. So there's a lot to be said about that, just an example. And of course, action. So what have you done lately? Not just talk, what's on the nice PowerPoint presentation, but what's been happening, what's been going on since. And I'll show you a small model that will help you make sure that these things are actually running smoothly in your day-to-day. So the value category of learning. This is also not big in the machine structures. Well, formal learning. I was sent to amazing business schools and do amazing training courses. And I know a couple of you at least have also done this. But learning in the day-to-day and this cliche about being allowed to fail as long as we learn from it and don't do it too often, but really to have this approach. This may not work the way we intended the first time, but we still have to make the step. So to be open-minded about that. Diversity also comes into learning because we learn from different worldviews, different opinions, different experiences, even different values. They bring different lenses. Now, they have to be relevant lenses. You don't just put an ice bear in Sahara because you want diversity, right? It doesn't make sense. But diversity and understanding how to activate that is really a lever as well, as is, of course, non-negotiable personal development. Final category that I've included here is change. Most of you, I think most leaders at least that I work with, if not all, are dealing with change. Some all the time, some more infrequently, but in a sense, if you're not leading change, you're not leading at all, right? And change requires to be not only comfortable and okay with change, but also to actually be activated by change and to be able to follow those impulses and the call that you'll often find in change, in the need for change, require a kind of resilience. I've put here as well responsiveness, hearing what's going on and responding, taking in that information, flexibility and mental agility. So the agile mind, the growth mindset fits this really well. Now, these are the ones that I've included. I'm wondering how they resonate with you guys. Do they resonate? What do you think? Have I left out an important value, something that you hold high? And maybe just take a few seconds to reflect now that you're here. What are some of your non-negotiables? What are some of your non-negotiable values? And maybe even write them down. I don't know if you're there with pen and paper or maybe a notepad. What are your non-negotiables? All right. So with all these, let's say, fluffy words or human words, you may still hesitate and say, okay, I'm not sure why would they be any better than the values that we have at our corporation. And of course, I can't say that they have. What I do know is that every single one of these values, when they're lived, when they're expressed in your organization, when they're expressed in the day-to-day, every single one of them will help you unlock performance and unlock the potential. And it does that for just one very simple yet hugely complex reason, which is the human neurological system, the human brain or the human brains. It is believed we have 5 brains that are active at any given point in time. When we work with these, or rather when we live these values and work in alignment with these, when our behavior is aligned with these, you open up your thinking capacity. What happens is that the neurochemical soup that is dominant in your system at any given point in time will upregulate on really cool hormones like oxytocins, like dopamines, even testosterone, but in a measured way. So the action hormone, the bonding hormone of oxytocin, the happy hormones of dopamines. So you're creating a soup for yourself, and there's research supporting this. It's not just so neuro research actually shows us how talking in a way, for instance, that promotes trust fires up a lot of neural activity that you wouldn't have if you were in distrust, if you were in your fight and flight mode. That mode really closes down thinking. And unfortunately, that brain mode is much more active in the machine than we like. So again, back to the toxic emotions, to the ego-driven agendas, all of those things fire the opposite chemical, neurochemical soup, and it closes down, it literally closes down your thinking. It closes down your empathy capacity. You can literally see and hear and understand less, and you can think less when you're a closed state of mind. So when you organize your day-to-day work for yourself and of course with your team in a way that is aligned with this basic way of human operating mode, when you do that, you literally empower people. You help them fire up their own intelligences, their access to their own brain and thinking capacity. Trust is increased by the oxytocin, for instance, because I have a sense that you actually want my best, that you want our best or the best for the organization. And that's why we're having this conversation. It might not feel so pleasant, but I understand that you're doing this in a way because you care about our relation, because you care about my capacity to perform. I wish so much that many more of the performance reviews that I have had as an employee, as you know, with my manager, also as I moved up the system, that they were more promoting the open way of thinking and much less closing down my thinking capacity. I wish I'd been better at managing this. Today I know how, and that's also part of what I'm sharing with you here, because everything I do, every single tool that I'm using promotes and supports this open way of operating. I hope you'll recognize this as we move on into the next couple of things we want to be doing. So this is how you actually do unlock potential, and do that with your team. And you can actually say that developing the team and performing in the team becomes everybody's job, because everybody's brain is at its full open capacity. And you know, your trust systems, your type of dialogue you can have is at a totally different level. I get excited. If you have a question relating to this, either drop it in the chat or save it for later when we have our Q&A. And let me just double check on time to make sure that we are okay here. Yes, we're okay. I will be speeding up my talking a bit. We've got a couple of things more to cover. Then I said this about my 3-step formula. So real change really happens through these small daily practices, the micro actions that I love to be implementing. It's a sort of simple formula, and you might say, okay, maybe that's too simple, but it's not. You, of course, just need to be using it. And with so many things, it's simple, but maybe not so easy, especially at the first couple of times. So, you know, test it out, practice. You can take this and go back home and use it immediately. So first step is awareness. You want to be aware of what are the lived values, what are the lived beliefs and skills and so on that is expressed in your team's daily work. So what are they showing you? The one difficulty I find with this is that many leaders are simply not aware, simply because we don't have very sharp observation skills. We are a lot in our own head. When you're in there, you can't be out here. So being present, and also, of course, having the privilege of spending time with my team members is, how can I observe this if I don't see it, right? Or hear it? So awareness is the first level. We often say that being aware is actually half of the solution. So what's going on? Then you have a decision to make, step number 2, and that's to make a choice. So what is it I want to strengthen or eliminate, or maybe add new to the equation? To what's going on? How do I see that shift to the next level? Or how do it, you know, what kinds of friction am I aware of that I want to be smoothing out or eliminating, get out of the way? Make a choice and a real decision to do this work. Way too often we say, yeah, we also need to build trust, for instance, in this department, or we really need to get our feedback practices up to speed. And then, you know, if it's not a real decision, you are also likely not going to get to real implementation. And I put here perseverance, because continuing and continuing and continuing, this is the idea in micro behavior. You do something and you do it all the time. You do it repeatedly until it becomes second nature for everybody. This is how you build norms, both for yourself and also, of course, in your team or in the entirety of your organization. How do we implement new daily habits, new leadership practices, or just maybe a tweak to the practices you have already, so that you can integrate one of the key elements that you have chosen to, let's say, upregulate, to have more of, or so that you can get rid of some of the stuff that gets in your way. Sometimes also you need help from the outside. That's why I have a business. So workshops and exercises that you can blend into this, right, is also part of this equation. I put up a couple of examples. I've previously spoken quite a bit about delegation, for instance. If you want more accountability in your team, a very good place to start is to look at your delegation process. Are you good at delegating? Do you delegate at all? How do you delegate? Do you follow the good structure for effective delegation, for fruitful delegation that is designed to increase accountability? Because you can also delegate to increase learning, right? So be focused on what is really important to build now, and how can I put elements into the practices that we already have. If you want more trust, then what you want to be doing is to display behavior and ask people to behave, call on behavior, for instance, with a meeting standard. How do we run meetings here? Or different communication standards, conflict resolution protocols. How do we do this around here? What does it sound like? So that the way you approach it promotes trust, that it fires these positive neurons in your brain system. So you can do that, for instance, through check-ins, like taking the time to ask people, how are you doing today? It sounds really simple, but when people feel seen and heard, and you need to be present, of course, so it's not just a scam, right? But that has a direct effect to upregulate how we feel about the situation, how we feel in the relation. So it's really tiny tweaks that you can do. You can also ask open questions and be really interested in the answer. Show interest in the other person. Simple stuff, but the psychological effect is just astonishing. And this is how you build stuff, right? This is how it comes from paper and into daily practice. So those were just a couple of examples. And I just wanted to list a couple of the key practices that I have a focus on. And I'd be curious to hear whether you have other ones that you're really concerned with, or that you would like to work with. It always expands my horizon when I hear from you guys. So feedback practices, it's one of my, this is a non-negotiable in a performance team. Performance reviews, of course, since we have a value category that's performance. Conflict resolution, I've already mentioned that. We could unlock so much potential if we could just get past that barrier of not wanting to deal with conflict or even enter into it. Development coaching and delegation, as mentioned. For me, these are really some of the keys to build a team culture that you could call a highly functional team culture, where you will have sustainable performance over time, and where you will have, as I said, micro behaviors that reinforce each other all the time, so that your team can do a lot of this stuff for themselves. Because feedback doesn't need to be from you to the employee, right? It's actually likely much stronger when it's from peer to peer. So again, this is about activating your team, in a way, nudging through behavior, and you calling on the kind of behavior that you can see will promote or bring forth where you're already operating at today. Right. So one thing I just wanted to mention here as well is that, so it works two ways. If you have practices like feedback or performance reviews, let's just take performance reviews that you already have in place, which is likely. So you can also strengthen the practice, enrich the practice by picking from the three-step formula thinking, certain values, or let's say thinking patterns, or a belief, or just a new value that you wanted to add, let's say trust, into the performance review. If you run performance reviews and you yourself display the behavior, then the performance review will help you strengthen the culture. So culture strengthens practices and practice strengthens culture. They sort of go hand in hand. I hope that makes sense to you. And just a very brief example, I almost got a great contract with a client who wanted to really roll out in the entirety of the organization a more modern approach to performance leadership. And so we did some initial analysis of the organization, where they're at, how they're operating today, what's in place. And we found that introducing the measurement systems for performance that they were actually looking to do, because it worked in the UK, it worked, in Germany, it worked everywhere. So they thought. They wanted kind of system as well. We found that the level of trust in this organization was so low. I mean, the blood red numbers in terms of trust levels, that implementing a system or a process to talk about performance in that kind of environment would just totally blow up things. And I said that we had a conversation about that, and obviously I did not get the contract, which today I'm grateful for. But at the time, of course, it was a bit painful. But you really can't implement a culture or let's say a process into a culture that can't hold it, that can't promote it. You'll get some really nasty things out of that. So with that, let me just. So the third takeaway that I promised you is this about possibility orientation. And I would want to take at least, let's say, 10 minutes for this. For me, possibility orientation is really the key. If you can make this one shift, there's so many other things that will follow. And you may already be, in that space. You may already be really good at envisioning where you want to go. Be good at sharing your vision, your strategic goals and outcomes with your team. Here, the possibility orientation is actually also directly linked back to what we talked about, the neurology. When you're in possibility orientation, you are automatically in open neurology. When you're in open neurology, like in an open state, you are more possibility oriented than problem oriented. And it is in possibility orientation that you really set free creativity, good scenario thinking, audacious thinking, courageous thinking, and discussions with candor that are all designed to bring you in the right direction. There's so much good that follows once you make this shift. And so I've listed for you, how do I do this? How do I promote, for instance, this possibility orientation? Well, you can start with, having a battery for yourself of great questions that send the mind in that direction. When you ask a question, the other person's brain, at least for a second, has to follow. And when the brain follows, the neurochemical juice is also following. So the question you ask can either stimulate, like oxytocin and all of that good stuff, dopamines, or it can stimulate adrenaline and cortisol, these stress hormones. So be aware of the questions you ask and also the tonality with which you ask them. Here are some of the really cool questions, I think, that really unlock great discussions and thinking capacity. Also, problem solution for that matter. As long as you can talk about problems from a possibility orientation, they more get, they become things you deal with. They become challenges you want to take on more than they become something you feel stuck with or irritated about. So what does success look like? What does it look like for you? What does it look like for us? This is a question I ask clients when we talk about, for instance, how their performance reviews run, or we talk about what are good KPIs for them. This is great for development talks. So what does success look like? What is it you most want to see as a desired outcome in the future? What kind of future do you want to see happen? And what's it like when it's like that? What would this outcome bring to each stakeholder, or what would our customers say when we are really operating like that at our best? We're in that successful future. What will the other departments say about us when we have this seamless, aligned cooperation or collaboration? What do other people in the organization say about us? And that's a big scale kind of possibility, but it's also where do you want to be after next week's test run with this client and the meeting that you will have with them? Where do you ideally want to be? So those are questions that will direct your colleagues or team members thinking, and with that, their entire system into the future and into what's possible, what we want to achieve. That's so powerful. And there are ways to do it to increase really the power of it. And you can go back and watch one of my live LinkedIn LinkedIn live sessions where I go into more detail about strategic planning following this kind of template. I call this the dynamic futures framework. It's a different way of operating with future scenarios and even next week's scenarios than what we very often find is the case in organizations. I've added a couple of questions as a kind of a teaser because these are all about future possibilities, right? But possibility orientation is also in the moment. As I said, it's this way of holding yourself. It's this way of neurochemical soup where you feel open and okay, even to take on a challenge, even to take on, a pointed question from somebody or a funny remark from somebody who thinks differently than yourself. And so these could be questions like, what is the most important progress that we've made or that you've made with client A since the last review? So a super cool way to start a review meeting. What is the best of your recent successes? What you're most proud of that you've produced recently? So these are types of possibility-oriented questions that are designed to open the systems, not shut them down. And you want to be aware of that. And you also want to be aware of, and this is just really briefly, how you structure your dialogue. So because as you put in questions in the same kind of structure again and again, this is actually, it becomes a practice. This becomes a review process or formula. This becomes something we get so used to that it becomes a norm. You want to make things simple and fractal in the sense that you repeat the same thing again and again and again and again, because then it becomes second nature. The brain simply warms to the idea and it becomes a habit, the new normal way to do things or to think about things around here, to talk about things around here. So you may know the coaching models like the GROW model, for instance. I'm very familiar with that, of course, but also the personal leadership spiral from Acuity World and what I have then named the dynamic futures framework. Essentially, it is super simple. You have the present, where we at, what are our successes so far, where we at with this client, for instance. We have a future position that is usually better than where we are today. And then we have a gap between the two. And now the question becomes, where are we right now? What does great look like for you? Where do we want to be? What kind of future do you see? What do we most want to achieve or accomplish together? And then the gap, how do we get there? It sounds super simple. Here, the key, of course, is to, as I said, repeat the same structure again and again and again. It'll make your life as a leader so much easier as well. But you're also making it much easier for your employees' brain to understand, what's the kind of dialogue that we want to have around here? What's a norm for our communication? What does our performance communication sound like? And you want to make sure that you're asking the right type of questions that are designed to promote that open state. So this is one way to master or enter into and design your actions, even your language, to support possibility orientation that will support your team's performance. And that will unlock even more potential because you're opening their thinking capacity. You're opening literally their intelligences by this kind of communication. Just an example, but a really powerful one. So go home and do that. If you did the pre-work, the prep work that I sent in the reminder emails prior to the session, you'll see that I also included some questions for you that are along the same lines, to open your mind for actually entering this masterclass and think about, so what does great look like for you? When you're fully aligned and when you have your team in full alignment, what does that look like for you? So think about that. Go back and do the prep work if you didn't do it already. I promise there's so much power in that. Take your time to do that. Okay, the last thing here is actually a bit of repetition of what we've already done, or at least redundant, but I wanted to just stress it once again that human skills are really key to be doing this. And I talked about, mentioned also in the invitation, that the most obvious equation for sustainable performance includes human skills. It actually puts the human being at the center of the performance equation, not the number, the human being. And you want to be doing that because fundamentally, it's the human being who displays a behavior that produces a kind of outcome that is then measured as a result. Right? So if you want to lead behavior, you want to understand the human starting point in this equation. And then you want to apply all the skills that you have, the human skills, of course, your professional skills are also still valid, right? Your business acumen. Apply your human skills to see, okay, in this situation, how can I navigate this? Apparently, Karen is not so motivated right now. How do I manage that? How do I help her feel greater motivation? And this is again back to what I said. So this is also the team's job. It is my firm belief, and this is how I conduct my trainings as well, that the person who can motivate Karen, it's not you, it's Karen. And the responsibility for high motivation level sits with Karen. Now, there might be conditions, that's very often the case, where you have a job to do as well, right? You have to have reasonable requests. You have to have a supportive work environment. There's a lot of things that also need to be in place. That's your job. And of course, your human capacity to promote that kind of thinking and feeling in her, that she can step into it. Maybe the toolbox that she's not aware of. If you start with that, with a real consideration of the human being in the equation, with all the odd things that is going on in our brains and in our feeling centers, our emotions, that are still valid management information. An emotion is still, it may sound fluffy, but it's still super valid, right? I'm looking at the time because I would really like to give you an example of this. Let me do that, but just real briefly. In one of the biggest transformation projects that I was a leader in, I'm ashamed to say because it didn't go very well, we're sitting at this meeting around the table, the board of directors, the top management structures, and of course, a couple of handful of specialists. And we have this consultancy firm from Germany that's just top dollar, that really great recommendations, super intelligent people. So we work with this and we think we have a beautiful plan. How do we do this turnaround? How do we manage this massive transition? And we're also a little bit pressured on time. So we sit at this meeting, and one of the key stakeholders, one of the, first of all, her business capacity, her technical insight, her expertise was, we needed that. The company needed that for the turnaround, without a doubt. And also she was kind of an ambassador. People look up to her. Right? She was an informal leader in so many contexts, not just in her own department. So she's one of the key stakeholders, and we sit there and we ask for her agreement, her commitment. And she gives that agreement and commitment. But in that second, I saw, her signals were not an agreement. That is human data. Something is not right with Anna. She's just not, she's not committed. And of course, she said yes, because you couldn't say no. In this kind of business environment, in this kind of culture, you can't say no. Well, you could, but it wouldn't be very constructive. And we did not have the time to listen to this because it would mean, a lot of extra work, and it wasn't in our timeline, it wasn't in our schedule. And also, I was probably the only person truly interested in the human kind of data. This was after my awakening to this kind of space. And we just didn't take that dialogue. And that was one of the reasons that things went just totally haywire. It was so costly, both on a human level and also on a financial level. And it was a total embarrassment in so many ways. But so it's just one small example of human data that sits there present. And it has a huge business consequence. I've seen that again and again and again. Big things, small things. So upskill. And I'm not the only one saying this. If we look here to the source here is the Future of Jobs report. It's a couple of years old. I'm looking for the new version all the time. It's from World Economic Forum, and their top 10 skills for 2025. As you'll see, a number of these are actually human skills. So of course, there's a tech side that is really challenging us, and I would say that points even more to human skills becoming key for us. Active learning, learning strategies, complex problem solving. You can only do that when you have an open mind, when you've got access to your thinking capacities. Same with critical thinking and analysis. Creativity, originality, initiative only happens when you're in an okay state, when you've opened for that thinking potential, for that reflection capacity, creative capacity of your team member. Social influence, and then resilience, stress tolerance, flexibility, human skills. So these are really the top 10 skills as seen by World Economic Forum, also by McKinsey's and PwC and so on. So it's fully aligned with what we've been talking about today. And I firmly believe that this is, as I said, your gateway, this community space, the human space, and everything we can learn from there, or the constructive things we can learn from that, before we can also move on into the future and have, for instance, what many of my clients are talking about and interested in, self-managing teams, self-led teams. So upskill on human skills, and also have your team members upskill on this if it's not already in place. All right, so what we have been covering today, and we're coming to the close of what I wanted to share here. Not quite yet, and we're not quite at Q&A yet. Just got a few minutes. So I hope that what you've taken from this is really that team performance can be and should be everybody's job. The rising tide, right, lifts all boats. The more we can work in unison and alignment, the faster things will go, the more smoothly, the more easy things will be. It's not just your responsibility to run back to the department and try to motivate them, on a bleak Monday morning. Real change happens through the daily practices, the 3-step formula. Also, if there's just one thing you wanted to do, move into possibility orientation, both when you talk about the future, but also, when you're in the present. Simple tools to do that, open questions, and fractal nature of the structure of your dialogue. And then finally, upskill on the human space. Make sure to pick at least the key ones that you see for you are probably the most important, or the leverage points to do that. So when I work or I have client dialogues or potential client dialogues, I'm often asked, so can you actually really do this? Is this, can you work with human skills in this way? Isn't it just, we're born like this? I hear that from employees a lot. This is just how I am. I said, you don't get to keep that, because it's not constructive. It's not promoting where we want to be going. So you need to look at yourself and say, how can I adjust that to be a better colleague, for instance? So yes, we can work with these things, and we can work with them fast. And this is where I want to be sharing with you how this is possible. I've allowed just a couple of testimonials in here. I know it's a lot of text, but the way that I work with clients actually does precisely that. Right? So it upregulates, it opens, and it integrates into daily practices. That's essentially the 3-step formula is what I'm doing. The way that you could see this is that also you have a choice, right? There's a way of working with, as I said in the beginning, being stuck, having friction. Some of us like to deal with friction. I recognize that. Some of us are adrenaline junkies and really like that, the good fight and winning the turf war. And if that's you, then you probably wouldn't have sat here till the end of the webinar or the masterclass. So, but that's one choice, is to remain in the machine The other choice you have is to accelerate a movement towards and through the human performance space to open for the future performance. And this is really the image for me, is this thriving biodiversity, where things become natural, they become more dynamic, they become maybe even more chaotic and colorful, but they're healthy and it's sustainable. We see from all the numbers of stress and what have you, the bleak numbers of the state of the workforce today, how little engagement we have and all of that. We see how the machine is simply not, it's not putting people into the equation, and human beings don't like that. Your new employees are very likely not going to like that. And maybe yourself want to see something different. At least that's true for many of my clients. So this is your choice, really. Maybe you're already in that new space. What's the next for you? And how quickly do you want to deal with the friction and inefficiencies that may still be sitting in the system? How quickly do you want to invite your team in to lead with you and to lead themselves in a way where you can talk about real empowerment, where they will be talking about, accountability, where they will be giving each other feedback? This, for me, for my clients, is really a desirable future. And the so that's a choice for you. And if you wanted external help on that, you know, I'm a coach and consultant. So this is what I do. And I'm presenting today for the first time the signature program that I call RISE, your personal and team potential program. The way I've been working with this up until now, or recently, at least the recent couple of years, is that it's mainly face-to-face. It's live training. It's an annual 12-month tailored program that covers all the building blocks of what I call collaborative performance, that human performance space, including mindset, including purpose, including trust, including personal power. Today, there are ways to do that online supported, and I'll be putting out much more about that in the couple of months to come, to make it easier, more accessible, also financially more accessible and more flexible for you, really, and for your teammates to be working with this and making real progress towards that future that you most want to see. There'll be resources, of course. There's the possibility of one-on-one coaching packages, so that's my signature program that is always tailored to a client. And it is designed to help you specifically accelerate the journey towards unlocking team and personal potential. So if that's interesting for you, you can contact me. And I wanted to offer now in the Q&A, I don't know what other questions you may have. If you have a question about how could I do this, or how could this be interesting for me, or, I'm not sure, it sounds sort of interesting, but then go to this link. I should paste that in the chat. Also, I'll send it out after this masterclass for all those who registered. Book a free strategy call with me. It's a 45-minute session, and you can use that to explore the ideas, the questions you might have, or just some, your specific point of friction or your opportunity that you see present in your organization. So that's my offer for today. And that covers everything, apart from, of course, a couple of minutes of questions that you might have. So I'll stop sharing here and see if there would be any questions in the Q&A. Oh, chat is disabled. Can I speak to possibility orientation being both a way of being who you are and also what you naturally or reflexively do? Yes, I may have covered Thomas. Yay, teal. Yeah, we love that, don't we? And thank you for all your inspiration, Thomas, from your own leadership work doing this. What are the 5 brains, and are there different ways to optimize the 5 brains? Oh, Tio, that is a big question. Yes, there are ways to optimize the 5 brains, and the brains are, if I get them correctly, so it's the reptilian brain, the fight or flight, that sits in the back of our, close to our brainstem. There's the mammalian brain, that's really our emotional center. And then there's our executive brain, the let's say the strategic brain, the human brain, that makes us unique in the way that we can operate. And on top of that, we have our heart brain. There's a lot of neural activity in the heart and also in the gut. So I've got a good feeling about this. Min gode mavefornemmelse. So your gut brain, and it's even been shown that the gut brain is in some ways more dominant than your thinking brain, which is, of course, interesting news. So this is the system of 5 brains you have. If you're interested in knowing more, Tivo, then write me. We're well connected, and I can share some resources with you for that. All right, Thomas, the fundamentally thing of doing good in the world, I would leave any company if the purpose deviates from doing good, if the ethical fading goes too far into machine mode and the focus transitions to profit only. The way I know you, I totally trust you on that. And from some of our dialogue previously, I also know that that's how you're thinking. And that's one thing that I'm trying to promote also, not to put words in people's mouth, but to let them connect, because I'm suspecting this is what you do. You connect with your truest self and where you're most at ease. And from there, you make evaluations. From there, you make your decisions. And from there, you are also at your utmost when it comes to courage, and acting seems easy, or at least a lot easier, right? If you're in that state. So when you create an environment where everybody gives feedback to everybody, yes, it also takes a classical sense of pressure of the performance review meetings. It does. I should have mentioned that. That is such a great comment. The more you can do this in micro behaviors, I was going to say, the better you become and the better your team becomes at micro behaviors, the less you need the formal reviews, because everything's already been talked about. You catch that in the day-to-day. You catch that in the monthly. So really, there will be no surprises. There'll be no shit files when you get to the review meetings. And one great advantage of that, let's say two, because one is, of course, how do you feel about the review? Well, it's just normal. That's how we speak around here. And it feels good because it helps progress. It helps us towards the right direction, or in the right direction. So that it feels good. And that means I can be constructive. It means I can be a good sparring partner. I can be, a resourceful employee, essentially. I've got access to my resources. And the other thing is that you catch things before it's too late, or at least as close to, the real action possibility moment as possible. KPIs, face it, we can learn from them. I respect a good KPI, and I've seen some excellent KPIs that really have their space because they help guide our behavior. They help, they underscore, they support our thinking in what's important here. What do I need to keep my focus on? Because we do have a performance focus as well. But they're late, right? They're very often too late. So the closer you can get to the point of action, and that's maybe my last thing for today before we close, it's really the more you can stay present, also when you're talking about the future, but the performance potential really sits in the present moment. So right now is when you can create performance together with your team, if you're having a team session, or with one individual, or even with yourself or your manager. That is the now. Now is when you make choices. Now is when you formulate ideas. Then you go execute in the future, but the future is not yet. The results you'll see in the future, but the performance potential really sits in the now. And that's why you want to be a leader who's present. And you do that by moving yourself up into the possibility space. Get rid of the talk and clatter that is so often in our head. And you stay present to what's happening in the conversation, in the relation, in the context around you right now. So with that, I'm excited to hear from you. Do book a strategy session if it's relevant for you. And do, in any case, go and use the tools that I've shared with you, and let me know how that works for you. It was a pleasure to have you. So pleased that you took your time and your focus and attention and spent that with me this afternoon. See you some other point. Bye-bye.